Well, thank you very much, David, for this presentation. We have time for questions, please, Bernardo.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would like to ask to David about the Zapatista movement and the problem of deforestation. What do you think about the controversy between the Lacandonian communities and the Choles and Celtales, because some Zapatist communities are considered by the Lacandonians as deforesting because of having cows and more children, and attributing to them the disappearance of part of the rainforest. What do you think about that?
Thank you. Other comments? Marco?
Yes, David, thank you very much for your presentation. And you know that I am a big supporter of radical ecological economics, your project. And so maybe you will allow me to return a little bit the provocation. And in the sense that it seems to me that you seem to be fusing a lot of Western thought, Cap, Polanyi, Illich, many of these figures with indigenous knowledge, right? And in a very productive way. So would you say that maybe ideas might transcend these geographical origins and maybe work together towards a shared cosmovision, so to speak? Because, you know, all these notions of reforms and consumption patterns that you are proposing, they are all also something that we have encountered a lot in the history of ecological economic thought. So if you might just add a few words on that, that'd be great.
Nobody else?
Well, if there is no more questions, I would like also to make a question to you, David. Is concerning political ecology or political economics. In the case of Europe, there is a movement, a strong movement, the degrowth movement, that is try to give some answer to the forthcoming ecological and the energy crisis. And I would like to ask you how you consider this political economy of degrowth from the perspective of the radical ecological economics. Thank you.
Brian?
Thank you, David. Hopefully you can hear me better now. I switched to a microphone, but I wanted to ask and perhaps offer some reflection on, because I know there's no single answer to the question I'm asking, but the issue here is, or the question I had is, how do you see the alternative cosmovisions, approaches and struggles that you're addressing against the sort of totalizing tendencies or aspirations they're confronting in the capitalist mode of production, which of course started very much as a North Atlantic project, but has come to attempt to consolidate its control over the entire world. And so how do we unify these more localized and subaltern struggles into a sort of a counterforce to that globalist or globalizing or universalizing tendency of capital? How do we sort of confront those two forces without losing what is important in the diversity and the plurality of the alternative cosmovisions that we're attempting to embrace and work with?
Okay. No one else?
There is There is
Right.
still a question in the chat. I don't know if there are too much question now, but if you want, I can read. The question is from Ilona Rack. He asks, could you please elaborate on your statement regarding Ostrom works being grounded in individualism?
Wow. Okay. Okay. Nobody else? Fine. I think I would begin. Bernardo, I have a very, very short answer for you. And it's not a sufficient, but the struggle between the Lacandons and some of the Zapatista communities is a struggle that was provoked and created by the Secretary of Agrarian Reform and the Ministry of the Environment back in the early 90s, if not even before then, before even the Zapatista movement made its appearance in 1994. The problem there is that the Lacandons, I don't think that there's any problem with recognizing that they have different ways of organizing their society and the way in which the communities are engaged in trying to survive. But that conflict between those two groups is being fed by the state government and the political government in a way that I would love to be able to talk to you about in detail, but not in this seminar. Okay. The three following comments all involve a beginning, all involve an incursion to the question of why are cosmovisions so important? And Marco asks, is there a shared cosmovision between them? Alberto suggests that he may see some commonality with the degrowth movement. And Brian asked the question, is any of this possible as long as you have the continued expansion of capitalism, which, and what I would like to emphasize is that the point of departure for the communities that we're collaborating with is the fact that they view a completely different perspective on the relationship between society and nature. And that's the point of departure. If, as Marco picked up, yes, I mentioned in my first slide, William Capp, I mentioned Polanyi, I mentioned Marx, but I don't think that that literature that I mentioned in the first slide, I could mention much more of the contributions, including Martinez Ayer's work in which is now called the Environmental Justice Atlas, or the vision of Clive Spash, which plays a somewhat, at least a role in the work of Marco and Antoine and the group of people you're talking about. What it doesn't involve is an examination of the different relationship between the societies and nature and the planet. And that is a fundamental cornerstone of the radical ecological economics model that we're talking about. What does that mean in terms of, for example, as Alberto asks, what does that mean in terms of degrowth? The degrowth people understand. I would argue that the degrowth is simply a modernized and a more sophisticated and a better framed presentation of the 3 R's of the ecological movement of several decades ago: reduce, recycle, and reuse. The problem isn't simply to reduce the imprint, the footprint, as you have with the Global Footprint Organization in San Francisco, California. The problem is much more profound than that. What we're suggesting, and in the penultimate slide that I presented, that Illich's presentation of tools for conviviality and the notion of changing the way in which society evaluates its relationship to nature and the way in which it uses its resources to protect, conserve nature, but not only nature as forests or as things, as areas, but rather recognizing that nature is living, that the peoples that I'm talking about are thinking about, are viewing and acting in such a way that mountains themselves have rights, rivers have rights. And this is something that is absolutely beyond the view of beyond the comprehension of what is most of the current thinking about ecological economics in the North Atlantic world. I would respond to Brian, and that's a discussion that Brian and I have to have because we're going to be engaged in trying to write an article that joins all this together. That the apparently inexorable expansion of capitalism, which is no longer, you're completely right, no longer limited, of course, for decades, if not longer, centuries with colonialism, no longer limited to the North Atlantic world. The fact is that these communities are trying to live, and in many ways, even in such a complex country as the one we live in here, Mexico, are trying to live on the margins of the capitalist society. The development of autonomy, the demand for control over territory, the political struggles against extractivism, mining, fishing, and perhaps just as important, the fundamental struggle to understand women's participation, not women's rights, women's contribution to this process as a different mechanism of what is called in the literature here in Latin America, decolonization, and is very, very much part of what is going on in Swarak or Ubuntu, Swarak in South Asia, Ubuntu in Africa, a discussion and a reclaiming of the fundamental equality of people in society, which involves a changing, therefore, and changing of social relationships and political structures, but also involving a recognition that reflecting, reorganizing, rethinking the relationship between society and nature and the planet involves rethinking all of the rights of all of the elements in nature. That is, not only human rights, but non-human rights, and how they get expressed in terms of planetary management. I think I'll stop there. I think, given the time limits and everything.
Are there more questions for David?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't answer the one about Eleanor Ostrom. That's
Yes.
a more complex question. But basically, what the fundamental basis of much of Eleanor Armstrong's governing the commons is the collective ownership, the collective private ownership of nature. And it's the collective management on the basis of those claims to ownership that is the fundamental part of the word governing, governance. Had she suggested that that the commons cannot be appropriated as property and therefore traded, I don't think she would have been given the Nobel Prize. And the whole question of what governance is, of a of the commons in a notion in which resources cannot be privately appropriated, but that territories are not private in this sense, and they're not fungible, is a fundamental criticism that many people now have of Ostrom's work on the commons. And you can see that completely illustrated in the nature of the articles that are being published in the International Journal of the Commons, which is the intellectual heritage of the Bloomington School.